I welcome you all to this session of our discussion of Sam Sullivan's novel, The Lonely Londoners. Now, today I am going to start discussing topics because already I have introduced Sam Sullivan and the text Lonely Londoners, situating both within and against the tradition of literatures in English. Now, I have also given you some idea of the plot of the story, pointing in the process the fact that this story is an episodic narrative, lacking inner cohesion of a specific story interest. In the contrary, there is basically certain tableaus, certain vignettes of the life of loneliness, and in some cases utter poverty that the black immigrants from the West Indies have to face in the lonely London of the 1950s. Now, I have also talked about the major themes, mentioning themes such as racism, pointing out that the racism in the United Kingdom of the 1950s is not overt like that in the United States, but covert, concealed by the politeness and diplomatic tact exhibited by the British whites. Similarly, there is also the idea of immigration and community. Hello. Coming back, I was telling you about another theme, that is theme of immigration and community. You know, one thing you have to understand, that these black West Indian immigrants come to England, come to London in search of wealth, in search of opportunity. They lack prospect in their home countries of Barbados or Jamaica or Trinidad and so on and so forth. Or even African countries like Nigeria, in many cases. And they come to England in search of respectability, in search of wealth, in search of opportunities, because it is considered to be some kind of a metropolitan center. And I am reminded of a character who is one of Moses' friends, who is nicknamed Big City. He has come to London because during the Second World War, he had always in the army talked about his fascination with the world's metropolitan centers. So London represents to him the promised land of fame and fortune, of glitter. So you have to understand that immigration is a theme that is at the heart of this book. These immigrants have come to England. They have been subjected to racism by the white Londoners. So obviously, as a defensive mechanism, they fall back upon their communities, most of them. Yes, there are others, people like Bert or Daniel, who actually try to hide their West Indian antecedents. But most of them are dependent on and attached to, as a last resort, the community of immigrants. Here, you will see that Moses' apartment becomes some kind of a den where they assemble, say, weekly in order to engage in a in an old talk. Now, I am deliberately using a old talk and not an old talk, not because I have gone out of my head, but that is there in the text. And you will see that the language used is different. While introducing Sam Selvan, I had talked about Selvan's eventual realization while writing this novel that the Queen's English or King's English cannot properly represent the lives of these black immigrants. This is something you have to understand. And that's why if you read, if any one of you try to read it, you will see that the language is nuanced, the language is full of West Indian words and phrases. No. So you have to understand this. Now, when people come from the Caribbean, they do not understand the situation in London. People like Galahad or Henry Oliver or Tolroy's family members, Tanti Bessie, Lewis, Agnes and their children, 2 children, they understand erroneously that London is a place for opportunities and plenty, and opulence. But this is something that is not the case in reality. Upward mobility The goal of these West Indian immigrants is basically a will o' the wisp. It tempts only to disappoint. Because most of the black immigrants cannot climb up the social or economic ladder because of the racism inherent in English society of the time. Understood? Similarly, you will see that some of them become at once despondent and wily. People like, say, Cap, who don't want to work, who live on the charity of their friends by borrowing money and duping them, not returning the money, repaying the money. And also living on the dole, the unemployment benefit doled out by the welfare state. So this is something you have to understand. Even strong, honorable characters like Moses or Galahad often fail to earn money enough to get any financial stability or upward mobility. Now, as I was telling you in my last lecture, if you remember, romance and sex may provide us with a very important theme of the novel as well. You see, love and sex are two things that these black immigrants engage in. Now, love here is in many cases mercenary or basically an offshoot of fetishism. Black men and white women fetishize each other, treating them as sex objects, desirable to attain. Because they are different, racially different, socially different, culturally different, and financially different. White women often have money, and black men often have desire, and the brute physicality that causes one of the white women with whom Moses has a sexual encounter to cry out that Moses was a black bastard. In a way, in a very topsy-turvy way, even this very foul word bastard is used here as a kind of an endearment. And often it gives wily customers such as Cap or Captain the means of sustenance, financial sustenance. Because Cap will not work. You think about someone like Bart, who also falls in love with a white woman like Beatrice. But if you analyze the motive of birth, you will see that this attraction has got not only an emotional attachment as its origin, but also some kind of social machination at its back. Now I come to the use of symbols that we can come across in this particular novel. Now, what is symbol? Symbol is basically a means of thought. It is a system of thought. You actually associate some characteristics with places, characters, events, acts, thoughts, colors, sounds, and so on and so forth. And you actually use them in literature and art. And even in our everyday conversation. For example, we all know that the color white may stand for many things. It may stand for peace. It may stand for purity. But conversely, it may also stand for death. Similarly, the color blue can be associated with death, with distance, and also with dejection or death. So you see, what distinguishes symbols from allegories is the fact that in one context, allegories mean one thing and only one thing, whereas symbols can be multivalent. They may, based on who is analyzing that symbol, mean many things. Okay. Now, in the Lonely Londoners, there are many kinds of symbols. There are symbolic characters and symbolic names. Similarly, there are symbolic places and symbolic acts. Think about them. If you are familiar with the story of the text or the text itself, you will know that there are certain places that symbolize certain things. But if you are aware of Christian mythology, you can also make sense of many characters, their names. I am going to talk about them one by one. Let's first take up symbolic characters and symbolic names. There are specific symbolic characters and like Moses and Galahad. Moses, if you know, if you have read your the Old Testament, you will know that he was a patriarch, a Jewish patriarch, who actually gathered the Jewish community in Egypt and actually led to their departure from Egypt. And he actually introduced the 10 Commandments, and he was a community icon. The moral and spiritual fiber of the biblical character is drawn upon by Sam Sullivan. Even though the surroundings that Moses inhabits, the situation or situations that he encounters lead to a diminution of the grandeur of the name Moses. Moses is basically, in the Lonely Londoners, a manual laborer who works nights because night jobs are often left for the black immigrants. He is a morally upright character who does not want to live on government charity. And he tries to do whatever he can for his community members. He judges them, but he befriends them. For many of the wily customers, he has only scorned. But still, because of the communal, the community awareness and affection, he often endures them, tolerates them. When I discuss the character of Moses later on, I will discuss the other facets of his character later on. Now you think about Galahad, whose real name is Henry Oliver. Galahad is a strong-willed, determined and optimistic human being who comes from Trinidad to England. Now, the name Galahad, if you have read your Arthurian legends, you will know that Galahad was a quester knight who was in search of the Holy Grail. So obviously, while calling Henry Oliver Galahad, Sam Sullivan had at the back of his mind the idea of his symbolic associations. Galahad wants to remain morally upright and yet prosper. He's always optimistic. He is in search of a better life in England because, as he tells Moses, he has no prospects in Trinidad, back home. Then you come to a character like Captain or Cap. You know, Captain is basically a Nigerian man. The son of a wealthy family. He had once come to England to get a law degree, but he dropped out and went on using the money received from home on cigarettes and on women. He's a debauch who even can stoop so low as to leverage his romantic and sexual relationships with white women because he doesn't want to work. He borrows money from his friends, he steals, he cheats, he deceives women. He always has a lack of scruples. At one time, for example, he has a relationship with an Austrian and a German woman, both of them white women. He borrows from one, and when he cannot repay, he steals the watch of the other and pawns it to settle his debt. Say, Captain, the name is not given. He is called Captain or Cap in short. So you see, Captain is the rank in a team or in any military establishment. You see, it gives you a rank and it smacks of power. He has got virility. He has got a kind of a perverse magnetism as well. That's why he can at once fetishize and attract white women. Then there are symbolic names like big city or 5 past midnight. 5 past midnight is a very dark-skinned Barbadian man. When anyone meets him, they say, and here just think about the racism. And here racism becomes very overt as well. White folk, they meet him and tell him, oh man, you look like midnight. And then they add, oh no, you're 5 past midnight, 5 past 12. So this 5 past 12 is a nickname that is at once pejorative and it symbolizes the skin color of the man. And you will be amazed to know that this man is a kind of a nocturnal creature. You know, he goes to parties and he has drinks and he smokes marijuana and engages in raucous nights and so on and so forth. A very promiscuous man. So the moral aspect of darkness is also something that is attached to him, that attaches to him. Now you think about symbolic places. Places such as, say, Piccadilly Circus or Waterloo Station or Hyde Park or the employment office. These are also symbolic. Waterloo Station is a big tube and railway station in London. That is the entry and exit point for those who will use or who have used boats to come in or go away from the United Kingdom. So it becomes a kind of a meeting place for the West Indian immigrants. You see, at the beginning of this novel, we find Moses going to Waterloo Station to wait for Galahad. And here he also meets Tolroy, an immigrant from Jamaica, waiting for his mother. So Waterloo Station becomes a meeting place, a hub for news of home. And it is there that sometimes the immigrants send packages to their home country through people departing from this particular place. So the keys of welcome and the tears of farewell are as common to the Waterloo Station as is the fog to London. Okay, you think about Hyde Park. Hyde Park is a very, very interesting symbol in this particular novel. Why? You see, Hyde Park becomes a symbol of a kind of a perverse freedom. It gives the black and the whites a place for meeting and having sexual introductions to one another. They fraternize, they meet, and often pair off to have sex. Just think about it. Don't you understand that the London that Sam Sullivan is actually painting here is a veritable wasteland of excuse me. T.S. Eliot's poem brought forward by, say, 25 years, we can very easily understand. Just as the wasteland evoked a barren land after the First World War, in a way, the Lonely Londoners also evokes a barren land after the Second World War. Think about it. Okay, let's come to the Piccadilly Circus. That Galahad, like many other black immigrants, actually frequent and associate with three things: energy, mirth, and merriment. It's all glitter. The white theater doors, the firecrackers, the sound of laughter, the gaudy apparel of the men and women. All these are associated with the sham and swank of city life. Okay. Similarly, think about the employment office where uh, there is a chance of getting work or at any rate unemployment benefits for the black immigrants. And you will see that the employment office symbolizes, again, opportunity for some and optimism for others. Galahad and Moses, for example, go there. And Moses actually sagely points out to Galahad that in many cases, in most cases, the job market is very, very discriminating. The best jobs are kept for the white population. And the manual jobs and the ill-paid jobs, the unsteady jobs, and the bad ones are given to the left for the immigrants. To add to it, there is also the question of the dole, the unemployment benefit that keeps afloat many of the complacent and wily immigrants who actually prefer to live on charity than to hold down any steady job. Now, Moses makes a very, very interesting remark in this context. Moses says that by behaving in such a reprehensible way as to live on charity, some members of his community, some black immigrants like himself, they actually go against what he himself is doing. By accepting the welfare benefit from the state, Moses thinks that these wretched and complacent human beings are muddying the water for honest folk who want to work and climb the socio-economic ladder in the respectable manner. Now you think about symbolic acts as well. Here, sex is a symbolic act. It's a very, very loaded and multivalent act in this particular context. Because in many cases, it is the means of livelihood. Similarly, going to parties can also mean getting money from the whites, who, even though they resent the presence of the blacks, think that no party can be complete without the attendance of a black man who can give them a big show, a jolly good show. So with this, I come to the end of my discussion of symbols in The Lonely Londoners. And now I actually invite questions and comments that may be relevant to my discussion today.
Bikram asked a question.
Yes.
Sir, this racism thing, is it one-sided? Don't the blacks also feel this feeling of racism towards the white? If a white visits any land of majority blacks, like West Indies or African countries, will he be similarly treated?
No, you see, the thing is, it's a good question, and I must thank Bikram for it. But you see, as I was telling you the other day while talking about Edward Said's Orientalism, if you remember, I had told you that historically the whites, having been the dominant group, they are treated differently, but not in a discriminating manner, in a negative way. Because, somehow the colonized people have been programmed to think of the white skin as indicative of power, of beauty, of strength, of all the desirable qualities in most cases. So when white men visit black majority countries, yes, there is hostility. But that hostility is the hostility of fear. You think about the case of the white missionaries in African countries, in the interiors. Often they are feared, and that's why they are resisted, they are killed, maybe. But you see, the contexts are different. But there was another aspect to your question. And I thanked you for that particular aspect of your question. You asked me at the beginning whether this racism is one-sided or not. You see, in physics, you have learned that every action has its equal and opposite reaction. So if there is racism from the part of the British, from the part of the whites, then there must be some kind of racial agency resorted to by the blacks. They also come together. The sense of community is the ultimate manifestation of that racial consciousness. But you see, because of the unequal power dynamics, the social hierarchy, the blacks are not in a condition to do anything very specific or very, very strong to fight the white racism in a place like London. All the same, I must thank you for raising this issue. Any other question? Yes, any other question? Okay. If there are no other questions, Siddiq, you may. Okay. Before I go, well, Shubhankita, you may now stop the